Hello, and this is part 2 of the Epistemology 2, the grounding epistemological statement for this channel. And I was just discussing Christology and my theological grounding, which is my premise is that the most important question of Christian theology is, what is the nature of Jesus Christ? So I discussed, I explained that there is such thing as a Christological spectrum. There are at least 5 different versions of Jesus: the Docetic, the Nestorian, the Niceno-Constantinopolitan, the Arian, and of course the Mormon would be a 5th, although I'm not discussing the Mormon one here. But yeah, I just wanted to discuss now Arianism, which is the one the Christological perspective I subscribe to. I subscribe to Arianism. According to Arianism, Jesus Christ is the Son of God, who was begotten by God the Father, with the difference that the Son of God did not always exist, but was begotten within time by God the Father. Therefore, Jesus was not co-eternal with God the Father. Arianism holds that the Son is distinct from the Father and therefore subordinate to him. The ecumenical First Council of Nicaea of 325, convened by Emperor Constantine to ensure church unity, supposedly to ensure church unity, declared Arianism to be a heresy, despite John 14:28, which clearly states the Father is greater, in which Jesus himself, in John 14:28, Jesus himself says, the Father is greater than I. So basically, Constantine, in the Council of Nicaea, in 325, decided that Jesus was a liar, and that he knew better, that Constantine knew better, and that no, Jesus is the same as God. Jesus is God, right? So yeah, so we have here a contradiction between Constantine and Jesus, right? Because Jesus stated in John 14:28, the Father is greater than I. Yet Constantine said, no, Jesus is the same as the Father. Okay, right. And then Constantine bribed the bishops to vote the way he wanted them to vote, right? So the Council of Nicaea is a fiasco. It was a fiasco, you know. The first Council of Nicaea was a fiasco. And the reason, and according to the Mormons, when I agree with the Mormons on this one, the reason Constantine was able to move in and hijack Christianity and turn it into the Catholic Church is because by the time Constantine, by 325, the apostles were long dead, right? The apostles had already died. There was nobody really directing and by then also a lot of dissension had broken in, theological disputes in the Christian congregation. They had undergone severe persecution under the Antonines, and that had a horrible impact. So yeah, I mean, by the time Constantine took over Christianity, moved in and took over, Christianity was already like seriously damaged and seriously not the original thing anymore. And also, like, the apostles died. As the Mormons point out, the reason for the apostasy is because the apostles died. The original apostles were not there anymore to mind the store. So then an opportunist like Constantine moved in and hijacked the religion, you know? Yeah, so, right. Anyways, let's not dwell. I'm not going to dwell on Constantine and Theodosius. Theodosius is the other one that came after Constantine, the Council of Constantinople. Theodosius was another one. He between Constantine and then Theodosius, they are the ones who, you know, hijacked Christianity and turned it into the Catholic Church, you know. Those two are the culprits of this whole apostasy or what have you. Again, Jesus is very clear in John 14:28, the Father is greater than I. Okay, and I leave it at that. I am an Arian. The Book of Mormon. I consider the Book of Mormon to be an instrument of restoration, and I recommend that people look at 3rd Nephi chapter 12, where Jesus communicates the Beatitudes to the Nephites, right? Because Jesus visited the Americas before he ascended into heaven. During the Mormon missionaries have clarified this to me, that happened during the 40-day period when Jesus was on earth, after he resurrected. He went to the Americas during that period and visited the Nephites and communicated to them the Beatitudes. And that is related on 3rd Nephi chapter 12 of the Book of Mormon. And 3rd Nephi chapter 12 of the Book of Mormon is what convinces me that the Book of Mormon is a legitimate instrument of restoration. Okay? More reliable than the Bible, because there are many translations of the Bible. But I'm not going to get into the Bible. I'm gonna leave the Bible alone. I'm not going to criticize the Bible. In this season, in the first season, I made very, very radical criticisms of the Bible. I'm not going to do that in this season. I'm gonna give the Bible a break. All right, but I prefer. Yeah, I'm gonna give the Bible a break. I'm just gonna leave the Bible alone in this season. Okay, that takes me now to politics. My political grounding. And I share the worldview of Marxism, but with agorist correctives, right? With agorist correctives. For example, I differ from Karl Marx. Like Karl Marx said that, he only had, he made a distinction between bourgeoisie and proletariat. And the bourgeoisie are the capitalists, and the proletariat are the workers, and that's that, right? I would say there is a difference, though, and agorism makes this distinction, and I agree with the agorists on this, that there is a difference between the entrepreneur and the capitalist exploiter, okay? And there's also two types of capitalist exploiter. There is the private capitalist exploiter, and then there is the state capitalist exploiter. So the entrepreneur is a good guy. The entrepreneur is somebody who is going to innovate and introduce new ideas and new products and new services. And he's an innovator, a risk taker. He's not like a large. He doesn't control a large conglomerate of that extracts surplus value from the workers or whatever. He's mostly self-employed. He's freelance. He has a small business. Maybe he has like a 2 or 3 business partners. Or maybe he's part of a small cooperative. But an entrepreneur is a positive thing. He's the good guy in the market, right? He's the good guy, right? And here in Sweden, that is one aspect of the Swedish controlled market. And the system of managed stagflation that they have here in Sweden as an economy. One good thing about what I hear is that in Sweden is really good for small businesses and like entrepreneurs, like freelance entrepreneurs or small businesses or like innovative projects or whatever. Sweden is good at that. Like they created like a system. The controlled market allows for entrepreneurial activity or whatever. And they encourage it and have services supporting it and what have you. And I think they do it in order to breathe life into the controlled market, because the controlled market and the system of managed stagflation, which is the Swedish economy. It produces the 4th largest unemployment rate in Europe. 1.3 million persons are on the bidrag, they call it, the welfare. A lot of people, a large number of people who are employed are actually employed in these subsidized employment schemes, which are fake work to cover up the real unemployment rate, right? And the people who are employed in these subsidized employment schemes get the illusion of work. They feels like work. You get paid just like work, not much. You don't get paid much, and your benefits are really like paltry, if any. Working conditions are whatever, average. Your wage is not going to improve. Wages are frozen because these wages come from subsidy, not from the market. So, you get the illusion of work in the subsidized employment schemes, right? And that's cool, but it's like being in the Matrix, right? The Matrix Reloaded or whatever. It's not real. you know. Or like a better example, the holodeck on Star Trek, you know. It's a holodeck, right? You go in the holodeck and you interact with holograms that look and sound like the real thing, but it's not the real thing. So that's the subsidized employment schemes. It's like the holodeck of the controlled market, right? Where you get the illusion of work, but it's not real. I mean, they pay you. It's not the case as in the Soviet system where, you know, you pretend to work and they pretend to pay you, because they do pay you. It's not much, but it's something, enough to live maybe. But, you know, it's not legitimate. It's not work that is conditioned on market reality, but it's conditioned on subsidies and schemes and what have you. So yeah. Anyways, the reason they allow for this entrepreneurial initiative and stuff in the Swedish control market, which is good, entrepreneurial initiative should always be encouraged, because entrepreneurs are the good guys of the market. You know, they're not like the capitalists, the private capitalists, or the corporate or the state capitalists, who are the ones who exploit the workers and whatever. They do the same thing in Cuba. In Cuba, they also have the control market. It's called Mercado Normado. And there they allow for the cuentapropistas, right? And the cuentapropistas are the people like the entrepreneurs, the small business entrepreneurs here in Sweden. The same thing in the Cuban system. They allow them to like set up their own small businesses and entrepreneurial initiatives and what have you, in order to breathe oxygen into the Mercado Normado, right? The Cuban version of the controlled market, which is based upon, you know, state ownership of the means of production, even though the said means of production are dilapidated because there hasn't been any investment in it for many years. But the means of production in Cuba are not exactly, you know, the latest technology. Let's just put it that way. But yeah, whatever means of production are there, they're collectively owned by the state, and collectively owned by the state. The working class is marginalized because Cuba is a bureaucratically, well, according to Trotskyism, Cuba is a bureaucratically deformed worker state, where the working class is marginalized from control of the means of production. So, and instead, the bureaucracy usurps power over the workers, usurps the power. So, yeah. Anyways, in Cuba they have cuentapropistas. In Sweden they allow for the entrepreneurs too. It's the same. It's a thing that they do when you're running a controlled market. You need to breathe oxygen into it, or else you end up with, like, you know, suffocating stagflation. You know, in order to relieve the suffocation that comes from the stagflation conditions that result from the controlled market, you need to inject new energy or whatever into it. So they allow for small businesses and what have you, which is good. And I'm glad the entrepreneurs are able to, like, develop their small business and their vision and what have you. I'm glad they have that. You know, it's good in both Cuba and Sweden. I'm glad. But anyways, okay, political grounding. I maintain that the most important question concerning Marxist Trotskyist political theory is what was the nature of the USSR, right? So the positions are orthodox. The orthodox position is that the Soviet Union was a bureaucratically degenerated worker state. In Trotskyist political theory, a degenerated worker state is a dictatorship of the proletariat in which a working class's democratic control over the state has given way to control by a bureaucratic clique. The term was developed by Leon Trotsky in The Revolution Betrayed. This is not just the case that the working class's democratic control over the state has given away to control by a bureaucratic clique. It's the working class's democratic control over the means of production have given way to control by a bureaucratic clique. In the case of the Soviet Union, through Gosplan, right? Bureaucratic planning, which was not the original, what, you know, was proposed was originally was democratic planning. The working class would be actively involved in the planning process, which would be decentralized, and not Gosplan, which is Gosplan was the opposite of what was supposed to be done, right? Yeah, then there is the revisionist theories of what was the nature of the Soviet Union. One is bureaucratic collectivism. And bureaucratic collectivism, bureaucratic collectivism is a theory of class society. It is used by some Trotskyists to describe the nature of the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin and other similar states in Central and Europe and Eastern Europe and elsewhere, such as North Korea. A bureaucratic collectivist state owns the means of production while the surplus or profit is distributed among an elite party bureaucracy or nomenclatura rather than among the working class. Okay, so that's bureaucratic collectivism. And bureaucratic collectivism, the theory of when George Orwell wrote the novel 1984, he was influenced in his depiction of the party and the Ingsoc, the political economy of what was it called, Airstrip 1, in describing that the political economy of it was a work of fiction, 1984, but the fictional depiction of the political economy in Airstrip 1 was based on the theory of bureaucratic collectivism, ultimately. Also, most importantly, it is the bureaucracy, not the workers or the people in general, which controls the economy and the state. Thus, the system is not truly socialist, but it is not capitalist either. In Trotsky's theory, it is a new form of class society which exploits workers through new mechanism. So a new form of class society, right? It's a new class theory, whatever. Now, in a similar theory, which is the theory of state capitalism developed by Anthony Cliff, the bureaucratic collectivist / state capitalist mode of production is a step sideways from that, because the progression is supposed to be that you go from feudalism to capitalism, capitalism to socialism, and socialism to communism, right? Bureaucratic collectivism and state capitalism are a step sideways. In between socialism and capitalism, a step sideways, a historical dead end, similar to the Asiatic mode of production. So, right. And again, this is revisionist Trotskyism. Bureaucratic collectivism and state capitalism are revisionist Trotskyism because they break with Trotsky's definition of the Soviet Union in The Revolution Betrayed is bureaucratically deformed worker state. So bureaucratic collectivism and state capitalism are revisionist theories that came later, after Trotsky died, after Trotsky was assassinated in 1940, excuse me. Trotsky wasn't assassinated in 1940. State capitalism. State capitalism is an economic system in which the state undertakes business and commercial for-profit economic activity, and where the means of production are nationalized as state-owned enterprises, including the process of capital accumulation, centralized management, and wage labor. The definition can also include the state dominance of corporatized government agencies, agencies organized along business management practices, or of public companies such as publicly listed corporations in which the state has controlling shares. Marxist literature defines state capitalism as a social system combining capitalism with ownership of or control by a state. But by this definition, this is more like China. China after 1976, where they restored capitalism. By this definition, a state capitalist country is one where the government controls the economy and essentially acts like a single huge corporation, extracting surplus value from the workforce in order to invest it in further production, right? And you could say this is China, Vietnam, and Cuba, because Cuba is becoming like Vietnam. In Cuba, el gobierno de sorry, I didn't mean to go into Spanish. The government of Díaz-Canel is engaged in this policy of Vietnamization, right? And Vietnamization means that he wants to copy the Vietnamese model, in which you preserve the symbols of so-called communism, while establishing a capitalist economy, right? A market economy like the Chinese one, which is a controlled market. So they'll have el mercado normado with the symbols of communism, but el mercado normado, then they'll probably have, the government agencies and state-owned enterprises will be systematically, they'll probably be broken up, privatized. There will be like a mixture between state-owned enterprises and private ownership. Probably like foreign investors will have their own thing, like in China, right? Or Vietnam. So Cuba is moving in that direction of Vietnamization, preserving the symbols of so-called communism with a capitalist economy. Capitalist, right? It's not really capitalist, it's a controlled market. Mercado normado, right? In Cuba, they're honest, not like in Sweden. In Sweden, they call it a market democracy of the whatever, bread and freedom, or whatever they call it in Sweden. The open society. I mean, they have all sorts of names for the Swedish economy, right? The Swedish system. It's actually a controlled market, but the Swedish state doesn't admit to it, right? They call it all sorts of names and whatever. Pretty names like bread and freedom and what have you. But it's a controlled market. In Cuba, they're honest. El gobierno de Cuba are honest. Mercado normado, right? Let's call it what it is. Like the Swedish state doesn't do that, right? But it is the same thing. Except that in Sweden, they don't use the symbols of so-called communism. They use the symbols of democracy, right? Which, yeah, but whatever. Anyways, that's the state capital. Those are the revisionist Trotskyists. The reply, of course, comes from both. There are two replies. Okay, there is a reply coming from Ted Grant, who is the founder of the International Marxist Tendency, which is one of the active Marxist Trotskyist tendencies in the world today, and they're represented in Sweden by the Marxist.se revolution newspaper, Marxist.se. Ted Grant penned a critique of state capitalism that is scathing, right? And I mean the critique of state capitalism is this: okay, the Soviet nomenclatura is a new ruling class, because according to Marxism, for it to be a ruling class, it has to directly own the means of production. The Soviet nomenclatura does not own the means of production. The state does. The Soviet nomenclatura controls the state that owns the means of production. So it's not really capitalist, is it? That would be the reply to state capitalism theory. But it's a back and forth between the orthodox and the revisionists on this issue of state capitalism, bureaucratically the form worker state, bureaucratic collectivism. Everybody agrees, and the official position of the Soviet Union under Brezhnev is that it is existing socialism, right? Actually existing socialism. That was the official position of the Soviet, and under Stalin it was Soviet socialism. And then when they switched from Soviet socialism to Marxist Leninism, then they say is existing socialism, which the Trotskyism absolutely rejects the premise that the Soviet Union was any type of existing socialism. And and I agree with that critique. I mean, I do not agree with the theory of existing socialism. That is ridiculous. Absolutely not. Soviet Union. I mean, the workers were marginalized from democratic control of the means of production and the democratic control of the state. Socialism is premised upon workers' power. So whatever. Let's just say that. Okay. They wrote a pamphlet called Cuadernos Marxistas, where they analyze Salvador Allende and the Unidad Popular government in Chile, and they are scathing of Salvador Allende. I mean, they say if from their perspective, Salvador Allende put Pinochet in power, basically. The Social Democrats created the conditions that put Pinochet in power. So the Social Democrats led to Pinochet, and they point out that how Allende prevented the workers from taking, Allende held the workers back and refused to give them weapons and refused to let them seize their workplaces, and the peasants were seizing idle land from the whatever, and Allende held all that back. And instead, and then the far left, the MIR, they were in the streets, holding demonstrations in the streets of Santiago, chanting "Trabajadores al poder," workers to power, and Allende marginalized them. I think he sent the police to round them up or whatever. Allende did this. Allende did that. So, and the Social Democrats. And what happened was that all that, because he held the revolution back, that created the conditions for Pinochet to then step in and stage the coup and get rid of Allende and set up the Pinochet dictatorship. So yeah, it was really interesting. The Cuadernos Marxistas is called. And it's the ultra-Orthodox Trotskyist perspective on Chile in Allende or whatever, 1970 to 73. But in terms of the Soviet question, they say, quote, in 1939, James P. Cannon, leader of the then Trotskyist Socialist Workers' Party in the United States, delivered the speech on the vital necessity for revolutionaries to defend the Soviet Union despite its degeneration under the Stalinist bureaucracy. His fire was directed against a minority faction headed by Max Schachtman, among others, which argued to abandon that position in the face of liberal public opinion. Like Schachtman, the reformists in the defunct International Socialist Organization renounced the Soviet Union as a worker state and embraced imperialist democracy against Stalinist totalitarianism. Right? Meaning that, yeah, because they consider the Soviet Union a state capitalist imperialism, right? Like state capitalism, social imperialist, or what have you. The International Socialist Organization was defunct in March of 2019, but yeah, right. And they criticized the ISO for embracing imperialist democracy against Stalinist totalitarianism. I'm sorry, but Stalinism was totalitarian. Okay, but it is true. Imperialist democracy is false democracy, right? So, in continuity with Trotsky and Cannon, the International Communist League, Fourth Internationalist, fought for the unconditional military defense of the USSR and the deformed worker states of East and Central Europe, as well as for proletarian political revolution to oust the Stalinist regimes, notably in the DDR. In 1989, the Spartacists went to Berlin. Actually, the Spartacists were in there when the Berlin Wall fell in 1989. All the Spartacists flew into Germany. They flew from everywhere they were. They were scattered all over the world, whatever. The different like cells of the Spartacists, they flew into Germany, and they agitated for the political revolution in East Berlin. You know, they were great. Watch that. Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, and in 1980, and then another thing with the Spartacist League, in 1979, when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, they supported the Soviet Union. They supported the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, arguing that that was a progressive act on the part of the Stalinist bureaucracy because it was going to extend the gains of the October Revolution to the Afghan peoples. And I was like, you know, they took this position. I have the newspaper where they took this position. It's called the masthead it reads "Hail Red Army in Afghanistan," you know, and yeah, this is typical of the Spartacist League, you know, the ultra orthodox. They're that way, you know. Yeah, but yeah, I mean they're committed Trotskyists, but some of their positions. Okay, let's see. In continuity with Trotsky and Cannon, the ICL fought for the unconditional military defense of the USSR and the deformed worker states of East and Central Europe, as well as for proletarian political revolution to oust the Stalinist regimes. Today, we uphold the same program for the remaining deformed worker states, China, Vietnam, North Korea, Cuba, and Laos. I disagree with the Spartans on this. I think there is wishful thinking here. The time for the political revolution in China passed a long time ago, okay? If you want socialism in China, you're going to have to start from scratch, and you're going to need a social revolution, okay? The time for removing the Chinese party bureaucracy is not going to no, because China has already developed a class of capitalists, you know. So China is lost. Vietnam too is lost. Vietnam is already capitalist. They preserve the symbols of communism, but communism. The Soviet Union was not communist. It never achieved communism. But communism in Vietnam is lost. North Korea I mean, for our political revolution to work in North Korea, you would have to. I mean, the North Korean regime is like a totalitarian entity, you know, where the military and the police rule like directly, you know, without any sort of like facade of whatever. It's a dictator. It's the ultimate dictatorship. I mean, you're not gonna a political revolution in North Korea. I'm not sure. Laos was lost a long time ago. And Cuba, no, I mean, Cuba, they tried that in the July of 2021, there were protests, you know, and you see where that led. I mean, it didn't work because a lot of people support the government, and this government supporters counter-mobilized and whatever. And then, yeah, there was all sorts of problems with the Cuba protests, whatever. Yeah. Maybe in Cuba you could have the political revolution. Maybe. But then the problem is that if you have a political revolution in Cuba, it will get hijacked by the right, by the Miami right, and then they'll just hijack the political revolution and use it to restore Cuba to neocolonial status.